Hi everyone, I'm Fairly Theta. Today I want to go through the Mushroom Tarot. This has not been opened since I got it, which has been really hard. But I wanted to record my first impressions and I've refrained from looking. This started as a 22 card major only black and white deck from Chris Adams, the illustrator of Corvidopolis. And it was put on Kickstarter to do a full 78 card complete deck. And it got turned into an 81 card deck with a full guide. So I'm really excited to dive into this. The box is super sturdy. I don't love these oversized boxes in general just because they take up so much space in my collection, but I actually really like the design of this. The guidebook is also really nicely done. It's not just a little white book or like a scrap of paper. It's beautifully illustrated. This is another deck where they have changed the suits from the traditional, wands, cups, pentacles, swords to align with the theme of the deck. Oh, it's got this really pretty copper foil on the side, in addition to this really beautiful, I like this yellow that they've been using, but it works really nice, they're a nice contrast with this really red copper. The cardstock itself is pretty flexible. I would worry that if I was going to use this in super regular rotation, that it would bend a little too easily. I'm a hard shuffler though, so that might be a me problem. So they also include the 3, what they're calling myco guides. These are archetypal mushroom specific cards. So we have A, B, and C, the mycelium, the hyphaea, and the spore, which are different life cycles and features of the mushrooms. So this is what I like about the mushroom as the tarot metaphor. I don't always love these kind of kitschy themed decks, and I think that mushrooms could go really wrong really fast. But this is clearly somebody who understands the life cycle and the actual botany of the mushroom itself, which is such an interesting metaphor for consciousness on so many levels. I joke all the time that we're just fruiting bodies of the mycelium, but I think that's somewhere that tarot as a system really does flourish, because it's drawing on these archetypal consciousness phases that we all kind of go through. So when you're reading tarot, what you're really looking at is where in this stage are you? What are you drawing on? What energy is coming in? These 3 additional cards fit really well, I think, into something like the major arcana. He could have easily just altered the major arcana to include these cards, but instead they're additional, which I really do like. So the mycelium being the network that all mushrooms kind of exist as part of. The hyphaea being it's the stage at which it kind of begins to come into its own fruiting body, I believe. And the spore, what continues on to perpetuate the life cycle of the mycelium, because technically it's all just mycelium. Even on the box, he has his mantra of the Mushroom Tarot in the name of the hyphaea, the spore, and the holy host, which I think is cute, clever. In his myco guide write-up, he says, the mycelium, under our feet and vibrating in the trees, there's an ever-present source of energy and life. Mycelium are the mycological power source, spreading life and generation in the soil and the hosts it occupies. Use this card to reflect on the underlying power we all draw from. The hyphaea are the links in the chain of mycelial fibers that grow the mycelium underground, inside a host, or reach up past the dirt and grow the fruiting bodies we know and love. Use this card to focus on nourishing your own growth and power. Think on the infinite complexity and beauty within yourself and reflect on your reading with that wild power in mind. So the hyphaea, the link between the upper and the lower. So that's kind of the middle ground of the as above, so below. The spore, we send spores out into the world to create connectivity to the whole. Think on whatever you find in today's reading through the lens of collective oneness or interactions with something bigger than yourself. In many card descriptions, we see a push-pull between inner reflection and connectivity to a universal being. After you've nurtured and grow comfortable with what you find inside yourself, try to work on a healthy way to share it with the rest of us. That's an interesting way to think of the spores. I love the colors in this deck. I really think that they did a great job with the colors themselves. They are clearly influenced by both the original Rider-Waite deck with those really vibrant but still kind of flat colors, as well as that kind of like 60s, 70s psychedelic kitsch style. And I think it's a nice balance. For example, the Lovers, you can see where it is very much influenced by the original illustration. Would assume this is a crow, considering his whole studio is called Corvidopolis. But let's see. So the Lovers, yeah, they're cordyceps. And he says, the Cordyceps militaris occupy their hosts as spores and internally regenerate to create a new and beautiful entity, an ultimate act of love and balance between life and death. There's a postulation that this process is a mutualistic relationship between the fungus, the insects, and the plant host, which the former rely on for life. If balancing a tiny ecosystem isn't love, I don't know what is. That's an interesting read, too, on the card itself, because I do think this is a card of perspective, and cordyceps are one of those mushrooms that I've never gotten fully on board with, because it does seem really strange to me that they prey on this very specific caterpillar species, but mushrooms do work so symbiotically that there must be some perspective in which this is beneficial for the host as well. The chariot, I like that the chariot are little frogs. That's really cute. This is clearly a Rider-Waite based deck also. You can tell because strength is 8 here. The Wheel of Fortune is a really interesting rendition too. So instead of the Sphinx, the Sphinx and the other 2 gods that are around the wheel, it's a salamander, a banana slug, and an earthworm. He does, so it says, be the newt sphinx you want to see in the world. So those were very purposeful choices. The Hanged Man is a moral, death, temperance. He really did stick with a lot of the traditional symbolism, because even in temperance here, the square with the triangle is present on the veil of the mushroom itself. There's a couple cards that I think tend to be the hallmarks of a deck for me. The Devil's definitely one of them, and so is the Moon, so I want to look at the Moon too. Devil is a starfish fungus native to Australia, popped up in various places in the world during the past few centuries, and is unknown whether this is due to human transportation of soils or some natural distribution of spores. There's nothing devilish about them except they smell like death to attract flies, and they look wicked. That's interesting because this is another materialistic card. It does look appropriate, but I do like that there's an added layer to, where does it come from? How does it get there? Is it our influence or is it something beyond us? Tower, the Star. Okay, here's the Moon. He's clearly got a salamander thing going here because the lobster is a salamander. There are dogs, but it says, so it's a Clavaria delphis is a genus of club fungus that looks like a stick a troll might whack someone with, or in this case, a couple of medieval towers symmetrically framing the night sky with a multi-phase moon. Well, that is an interesting point too, because the towers in the moon are technically a callback to the tower itself. And in this case, the tower is a lobster mushroom, which I've been dying to try. I like it when I can look at a card and assume something also from the choices that are made, when they're not just visual. These do seem largely visual, but there are some interesting perspectives being played with. So the suits themselves have been changed to fit the theme as well. The wands are all cordyceps, which look like little batons. This is one that I do think has, a nice added layer of symbolism to it too, because cordyceps are a mushroom that is used medicinally to enhance energy and help the adrenal system. When you think about wands in the traditional Rider-Waite, they are very much about like the against all odds. The charging forward without any necessarily like reason that you'd think it would land. Cordyceps are a parasitic fungus, so they do have to grow from an insect host. You can see in all of the wands cards, you have the cordyceps mushrooms, but also the color scheme is very similar to the Rider-Waite, where it's all these bright yellows and oranges and kind of burned, like deserty colors. And you can see all of the insects present here too. Like there's no bones about where these mushrooms come from, which is really interesting to me because like the Ace of Wands is one of those cards that is so iconic. The hand reaching out, presenting you with this baton. And here it's the caterpillar that is growing this mushroom. I think that this is definitely a deck where you do need to know the meaning of the cards to really be able to read it. Like you wouldn't necessarily see the Four of Wands and say like, oh, right, this is, stability and happiness and celebration, or any of those like classic associations with the Four of Wands, because it's some cordyceps growing out of a bug. They're beautiful, but they don't necessarily have that meaning coded into them. The court cards are all different animals. And I think this is actually a theme throughout the deck. So the page is this like flying squirrel. The knight is a salamander. There's a lot of salamanders in this deck. The king is a crow and the queen is a bear. The page is the only one that kind of deviates from this color scheme, but I think that this is pervasive. So I want to set these aside so we can look at them later on too, after we're done looking at the other suits. So the cups are appropriately cup fungus. And cup fungus, from what I understand, is primarily like all of the wood-eating mushrooms that you tend to find, whether it's, in the forest or like sometimes when your home has like undergone really terrible flood damage, you can get cup fungus in your floorboards. This is a little bit more like the classic Rider-Waite, where there are some meanings that you can see in the cards themselves. So like the Two of Cups, which classically, everybody reads as one of the quintessential love cards, has more of an intimacy to it. You see the ferns intertwined, ferns being, a really classically sensitive plant. The Four of Cups, this is one where in the Rider-Waite you would see the figure sitting under the tree, focusing on the empty cups in front of him instead of the hand, the ghostly hand presenting him with, the full cup. And minus the figure, that's what we're seeing here. So there is a lot more that can be drawn from this, like the Rider-Waite. For our court cards, got the flying squirrel as the page, the salamander as the knight, the crow as the king, and the bear as the queen. So then the swords are all psilocybin mushrooms. Psilocybin being, your psychedelic magic mushrooms, or the most pervasive kind of those. I think that's an interesting choice because swords is all about mindset. It's about communication and the way that we think logically about things. So there's a lot of research suggesting that psilocybin therapy can help people alter their mindset. Chronic depression, things like that can be remedied by the careful use of this. According to studies, I'm endorsing nothing here. Right away, this is probably the most interesting suit that I've seen so far because this is a total departure from a lot of the Rider-Waite depictions. And I say that because these are mostly nighttime scenes. You see a lot of stars, those kind of spory stars that we saw in some of the other cards. And this is... In Rider-Waite, you see a lot more of these like really tumultuous, like windy, stormy looking skies. This is a little bit more peaceful. This is at least a little bit more mysterious. This is like the moon card, I think, that we saw earlier. But they do really emphasize perspective. There is vision, I guess is the word I'm looking for here, written into all of the Swords cards. This is a really interesting choice. So let's look at the Court cards. These you do see a little bit more of that motion that you see in the Rider-Waite. Like these skies do look a little bit more stormy, I guess, but they're still not quite as tumultuous as the Rider-Waite. The Knight of Swords is one of those cards like typically about like messages and information, communication, and like swift motion, and yet there's much less motion here, which I like because there's often difficulty when you're doing readings trying to separate people from internal influences. And these Court cards in general seem to be set up as internal influences. Like I would be much less tempted if I was reading for myself to look at this Knight of Swords and say like, oh, somebody's coming to me with information. It looks a little bit more like it comes from within. This might be a better deck for like personal reflection than reading for others. This might be one of those more meditative decks. So the last suit would be Pentacles, which are a type of mushroom called a Gaiaster, which are really interesting because it breaks down to Earth Star, and they do look like little stars at a certain phase of their life. Another suit that is very visually tied together. The colors are pervasive throughout here. You do probably need to know what you're looking at. The Two of Pentacles is another one that like is really iconic and always kind of is drawn similarly with that, you know, infinity motion to it. But a lot of these others you probably wouldn't necessarily get a read from without knowing tarot to begin with. The Six of Pentacles, you have that one mushroom kind of spurting spores down on the rest of them. The Six of Pentacles is definitely like more of a family energy, so that does make sense. But again, without knowing that, you probably wouldn't necessarily know that. Six of Pentacles that I just talked about being this family energy, his explanation is the inheritance of proliferating life is life. The big Earth star in the sky has worked hard at what mushrooms do best, growing mycelial networks, exchanging nutrients with the soil and plants through their decomposition, and then expanding their mycelial family through distribution of spores. Now they can sit back and enjoy a little extra magic. And then 5, he goes backwards in the guidebook, says, the scene is the same, but the feeling is different. As in the 6, this card shows an Earth star who has done the hard work, but the outcome is hidden from him. Not taking the time to look beneath the shade of the sordid fern, they cannot see the new mushrooms sprouting from the earth. Boop is doing a great job of derailing this. A good reminder is that in hard times, it's okay to ask for help, even if it's from yourself. It is the journey of the mushrooms that you're following in these cards, you know, and backwards at that. You gonna do that, really? And it also kind of removes, you know, some of the more negative associations, because the 5 of Pentacles is another one that comes up and like instantly derails a reading, not because it looks particularly frightening, but it's a card of poverty and not having. And this alters it to be about perspective. What are you not seeing? What benefits have you received that you are not perceiving as what you want? I like that. That's actually a great little addition there. The Queen of Pentacles actually looks a lot like the Queen of Pentacles in the Rider-Waite deck. You have the figure seated with the bounty of nature around her. In the Rider-Waite deck, the pages are all different. You know, they're different figures. They have different hair, different clothes. And here you have this kind of character that runs throughout. So the Page of Wands is eagerly eating this bug that is also growing the cordyceps. And yet here in the Page of Cups, holding the cup fungus with the bug in it. Those are two very different emotional capacities, and I like that we have the same character to express them. Pages, you know, they can be read as young people in the tarot, but often they're the beginning of something. They're the stirring of an awareness. So this definitely reads as the stirring of awareness in different areas of life. Our Knight of Cups and our Knight of Pentacles look like the same salamander, and then our Knight of Wands and our Knight of Swords look like the same salamander. These are a little bit more reminiscent of the Rider-Waite associations, even the way that they are sitting, like the Queen of Cups sitting on the bank of this body of water, facing it but not necessarily touching it, that sereneness being in flow with emotion but not necessarily taken by it. The Queen of Swords actually looks a little bit like Crowley's star, the star in the Lady Frida deck, which is interesting because I've always felt like those were complementary energies, but you know, different astrological associations. Again, I know his design studio is Corvidopolis, so that's probably why the crow is king, but I would be very interested to learn if there's any more to that. I think that this is a really cute deck for, again, like personal meditation, working with it to give you something to reflect on. I don't necessarily know if it's the best kind of deck to introduce others to. Like if you are a professional, I'm sure there's times where this would be a great theme to work with, but I don't really know if if the illustrations are going to strike anything in your clients. You know, things like the Rider-Waite, even the Thoth are, I think, better. The more classic decks are probably better for that kind of reading. I do like that they are reversible. It's a well-designed deck. I appreciate the amount of thought that went into it, but it's cute. I'm really glad to have this in my collection. I think it's really fun, and I do like the mushroom metaphor for consciousness. So in that way alone, I think it's appropriate. Drop me a comment below, hit like, subscribe, stay tuned. There's a whole lot more coming. You're gonna bite me in 5 seconds.